Integration management ensures that initiating, planning, executing, monitor and control, then close. All of them flow together. That is only when they flow and they are coordinated. That is the only way you can guarantee a project success. If they are not coordinated, you may not be able to guarantee a project success. So those are the things that we look at, not something integration management.
So now, managing your budget is exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about cost management. So it simply means the amount of money that will be spent on the project for respect. So there are quite a lot of elements, like you said, which determine the costs. The cost basics are number one, they determine the cost of the individual activities in the project, which is from every stage, from one stage to the other. You don't just generalize, you take it stage by stage. This stage will cost 10 naira, this stage will cost 20 naira, and everything. Also, that will also involve the human resources, because the human resource will bring out the personnel and then all the paraphernalia that is needed for executing the project. So then you aggregate the costs to arrive at the total budget. So when you've mapped out the different stages of the project, then you now aggregate everything. And of course, that's where buffers come in also. So there are two ways you can actually implement that buffer idea. Either you add a little bit on top of what you've calculated, which you will keep as reserve in case of some unforeseen contingencies, or whatever you have. If for example, maybe the project owner refuses to add some money on top of it, you now work with at least 80% of what you have. Try to fit everything in, and then use the remaining 10, then 20 or 15% as your reserve. You always, in cost management, you always have to have a reserve, either in excess of the budget or something that you've been able to carve out from the budget that you have. Another thing is time phase the budget to determine cash needs. So you have to know how much to come up with at every certain time. How much is needed at every certain time, because sometimes the project owners do not release all the money. The cost management is actually done within the planning stage. So it is within the planning stage that everything about the costing, the budgeting, you're actually working with the time that you are working in conjunction with the time frame of the project. You're also working in conjunction with the human resource department, because you need to know the resources, the human resource that are available, and of course all the apparatus that is needed to execute the project. That's what will help you to be able to get the costs. So then when you talk of cost management, you plan the cost management, you estimate costs, you determine the budget, and then you control costs. That's what we're just speaking about now. So there are quite a number of terms. Okay, when it comes to estimating the budget now, there are methods that are used in estimating the budget. First of all, expert judgments, because in a situation where you're handling a project where you're not a master in, you would need expert judgments, which is somebody who is a master in that field, rather than taking you through what it takes. So expert judgments, you will be able to determine the resources you need to execute the project. Then you talk about analogous estimating, which is you are looking at similar previous projects, which is very For example, you're writing exams you've not written before, you're looking at past questions. That's an example of analogous estimating. Then parametric estimating means you are looking at a history of the of such projects, and then you look like something that was done like from 5 years ago down to the present time, and you look at the costs. For example, a similar project 5 years ago costs about 100 million. The next year it costs about 110 due to inflation. Next year about 115. So an average of all that, and then also bearing in mind the current level of inflation. So that can also give you an idea of what a similar project like that will cost in today's time. Then bottom up means you're calculating and estimating from the cheapest of the apparatus you need to the most expensive. That's bottom up. Then 3 points means you're applying the optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely pessimistic. Optimistic, you're budgeting like more than you think it will cost. Pessimistic is a little bit less, most likely. So an average of that gives you a more definite figure. Reserve analysis, you reserve a particular amount, which is what you're talking about. Reserve 20% or something like that. During the execution of the project, when you have gotten to the execution stage, now there are some terms that we need to also have in mind. Terms like PV, which is the cost, which is planned value, M value, actual costs, AC, BAC, budget at completion, EAC, estimate at completion, ETC, estimate to complete, variance at completion, VAC, then CV, cost variance, SV, schedule variance. They all have their formula. CV is equal to EV minus AC, which is M value minus actual cost. Schedule value SV is equal to M value minus PV. CPI, cost performance index, is equal to EV over AC. SEI, schedule performance index, is equal to EV over PV. So these are things that you calculate. M value is the amount of money you spent at a particular time in the projects. Planned value is the money that you actually planned to spend. For example, if a project is supposed to cost 50 million naira and the project is supposed to last for 4 months, normally it is expected that at 2 months you would have spent 25 million. That's the planned value. But sometimes you may have spent more. You may have spent 30 million. You may have spent 20 million. So what you spent is your earned value. But what you are supposed to have spent or what you're planning to spend is your planned value. So I don't
Tony. So it's safe to say that your first knowledge area is cost management. Cost management.
cost management, human
Human
resources.
resource management, right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate. I really learned a lot from you. Right? So you must work with people. You must buy things and so on and so forth. So if we have it in mind that in every project we must touch each of these 10 knowledge areas, it will help us in terms of successful project delivery. So whenever we have projects, the question that will now come to our mind is how can we apply integration management? Now we now tell ourselves that okay, how can we apply integration management is to ensure that okay, at the initiating stage of the project or discussing with client, this is what I want, this is what the client wants, this is what the client wants. That I move everything that I've discussed with the client into planning. We don't want to skip anyone. When the client is explaining to you, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, these are the things I want in the project. All of them, as long as the both of you have the agreement that these things can be done with the project, you move all of them to planning. So it's those things now that you will plan for. Then when you're done planning, you move everything to executing. You don't remove anything. As long as it's part of the plan, it must be part of the project. If it's not part of the plan, it shouldn't be part of the project. That is where change request comes in. If it was part of it, then that means you have to officially apply for change request. So we want to bring in this change. Then also the management will review, advise, project manager will advise, then we will decide if it's okay to adopt, we decide to adopt and we effect it in the project.